Welcome to Framework, the podcast that makes the NIST cybersecurity framework practical, engaging, and accessible. Whether you're a cybersecurity professional, business leader, or simply curious about how organizations defend against cyber threats, this series is for you. This podcast is inspired by a comprehensive guide to the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0, a best-selling resource written by cybersecurity expert Dr. Jason Edwards and trusted by professionals worldwide. In each episode, we'll leverage a few insights from Jason's extensive book to dive deep into CSF 2.0, unpacking every function, category, and subcategory with real-world applications you can immediately use. If you're enjoying this episode and want to learn more, head over to cyberauthor.me to grab your copy of the book and access additional resources to enhance your cybersecurity journey. You can also visit baremetalcyber.com, where over 2 million people last year explored expert insights, articles, and practical tools across a wide range of cybersecurity topics. ID.RA-05, Understanding Inherent Cybersecurity Risks. ID.RA-05 ensures that organizations identify, evaluate, and comprehend the baseline cybersecurity risks that exist within their infrastructure, operations, and industry environment before implementing mitigating controls. This subcategory belongs to the Identify function within the National Institute of Standards and Technology Cybersecurity Framework, version 2.0, emphasizing that organizations must recognize their inherent cybersecurity risks, the risks that exist even before additional security controls are applied, so they can develop realistic and effective risk management strategies. Without structured identification of inherent cybersecurity risks, organizations risk underestimating potential threats, misallocating security resources, and failing to establish effective cybersecurity governance. By understanding inherent cybersecurity risks, organizations ensure that their cybersecurity teams assess vulnerabilities, threat exposure, and operational risks holistically, allowing for a strategic approach to risk mitigation. A structured approach to risk comprehension enables organizations to recognize fundamental weaknesses, analyze how existing threats align with industry risk trends, and prioritize security enhancements accordingly. Organizations that adopt risk assessment frameworks, integrate real-time security analytics, and conduct baseline risk evaluations improve their ability to detect cybersecurity gaps, optimize security investment decisions, and align risk management with business priorities. Multiple stakeholders play a role in understanding inherent cybersecurity risks. Cybersecurity risk management teams are responsible for conducting initial risk assessments, identifying baseline threats, and providing recommendations for security control implementation. Business leadership and compliance officers ensure that inherent cybersecurity risk assessments align with enterprise risk management strategies, regulatory mandates, and security policy enforcement. Security operations teams and IT administrators leverage inherent risk assessments to determine which security controls must be implemented to reduce exposure to known cybersecurity risks. Inherent cybersecurity risk assessments are implemented through structured risk modeling, industry-specific threat benchmarking, and continuous vulnerability assessments. This includes deploying risk assessment tools to evaluate attack surface exposure, conducting penetration testing to assess baseline security gaps, and integrating inherent risk evaluations into cybersecurity strategy development. Organizations that fail to understand their inherent cybersecurity risks effectively risk implementing security measures that do not address fundamental risks, underestimating their exposure to cyber attacks, and failing to comply with regulatory cybersecurity requirements. Several key terms define inherent cybersecurity risk assessments and their role in cybersecurity governance. Baseline risk assessment ensures that organizations identify cybersecurity risks that exist before applying security controls, providing an accurate representation of their threat exposure. Threat exposure analysis ensures that organizations evaluate the likelihood and impact of cyber threats targeting their industry, allowing for informed risk mitigation strategies. Attack surface evaluation ensures that organizations assess the range of potential entry points that cyber adversaries could exploit, helping security teams develop more effective defense mechanisms. Risk tolerance and acceptable risk levels ensure that organizations determine which cybersecurity risks must be mitigated and which may be tolerated based on business priorities and regulatory requirements. Industry-specific risk benchmarking ensures that organizations compare their inherent cybersecurity risks with industry standards to identify sector-specific vulnerabilities and best practices for mitigation. Challenges in understanding inherent cybersecurity risks often lead to poor risk prioritization, ineffective security investments, and failure to integrate inherent risk assessments into cybersecurity governance. One common issue is failure to differentiate between inherent and residual risks, where organizations misinterpret inherent risks as mitigated by existing security controls, leading to overconfidence in cybersecurity readiness. Another issue is lack of industry-specific risk awareness, where organizations fail to benchmark their cybersecurity risks against industry trends, reducing the accuracy of risk assessments. Some organizations mistakenly believe that only external threats contribute to inherent cybersecurity risk, without recognizing that internal factors such as legacy systems, human error, and misconfigurations also play a significant role in baseline cybersecurity risk exposure. When organizations implement structured inherent cybersecurity risk assessments, they enhance cybersecurity situational awareness, improve risk mitigation strategies, and ensure that security investments align with real-world threat exposure. A structured risk comprehension framework ensures that cybersecurity teams assess fundamental risks before applying mitigation measures. Business leadership aligns security investments with baseline risk assessments, and security teams implement proactive defenses tailored to inherent vulnerability. Organizations that adopt industry-specific risk modeling, enforce structured attack surface evaluations, and integrate inherent risk benchmarking into cybersecurity governance develop a comprehensive security framework that strengthens resilience against evolving cybersecurity threats. Organizations that fail to understand their inherent cybersecurity risks face significant security, operational, and compliance challenges. Without structured risk comprehension, businesses risk misjudging their cybersecurity posture, overlooking critical vulnerabilities, and implementing ineffective security controls. A common issue is treating all risks as equal, where organizations fail to prioritize inherent risks based on actual impact and likelihood, leading to inefficient allocation of cybersecurity resources. Another major challenge is failure to assess the risk of legacy systems and outdated infrastructure, where organizations continue using unsupported technology without fully understanding its security implications, increasing exposure to cyber attacks. By implementing structured inherent risk assessments, organizations ensure that cybersecurity teams develop a clear understanding of baseline security weaknesses, enabling more effective decision-making and proactive mitigation strategies. A well-defined risk assessment framework improves security planning, ensures that high-risk areas receive appropriate protections, and enhances an organization's ability to prevent cyber incidents. Organizations that deploy automated risk evaluation tools, enforce structured baseline risk assessments, and integrate inherent risk comprehension into enterprise cybersecurity governance improve their ability to detect, prevent, and mitigate cybersecurity threats efficiently. At the partial tier, organizations lack structured processes for assessing inherent cybersecurity risks, leading to reactive security planning, weak risk visibility, and an over-reliance on generic security measures. Risk assessment is handled informally, with organizations identifying security risks only after an incident has occurred. A small business at this level may lack formalized risk evaluation procedures, relying instead on basic security best practices, without a clear understanding of its specific cybersecurity exposure. At the risk-informed tier, organizations begin to develop structured risk comprehension processes, ensuring that cybersecurity teams assess inherent risks before implementing security controls. However, inherent risk analysis efforts may still be limited, with inconsistent evaluation of cybersecurity exposure across different business units. A mid-size retail company at this level may evaluate inherent risks for its e-commerce systems, but fail to assess internal employee security risks, leaving gaps in overall risk understanding. At the repeatable tier, organizations implement a fully structured inherent risk assessment framework, ensuring that security teams continuously evaluate baseline risks, compare them against industry benchmarks, and prioritize mitigation strategies accordingly. Risk assessment governance is formalized, with leadership actively involved in reviewing inherent risk reports and ensuring that cybersecurity investments align with actual risk exposure. A financial institution at this stage may use predictive analytics to assess cybersecurity risks across all digital banking platforms, internal networks, and third-party integrations, ensuring that inherent risks are fully documented and mitigated. At the adaptive tier, organizations employ AI-driven risk modeling, real-time attack surface monitoring, and continuous inherent risk reassessments to dynamically adjust security controls based on evolving cyber risk landscapes. Inherent risk management is fully integrated into enterprise cybersecurity governance, ensuring that risk analysis, security policy enforcement, and mitigation workflows remain continuously optimized. A multinational technology corporation at this level may use AI-powered risk simulations to assess the evolving threat landscape, dynamically adjust security protocols, and proactively mitigate high-risk vulnerabilities before they can be exploited. Understanding inherent cybersecurity risks aligns with multiple controls in the National Institute of Standards and Technology Special Publication 800-53. Ensuring that organizations implement structured risk evaluation frameworks and proactive cybersecurity risk mitigation models. One key control is RA-3 risk assessment, which requires organizations to analyze cybersecurity risks before applying mitigating controls, ensuring that security teams accurately identify and classify inherent risks. A global cloud service provider implementing this control may conduct inherent risk assessments across its data centers and customer-facing platforms to determine which security threats require the highest level of protection. Another key control is SA-8, Security Engineering Principles, which mandates that organizations incorporate inherent cybersecurity risk assessments into system design and development, ensuring that security risks are mitigated at the architectural level. A defense contractor implementing this control may evaluate the inherent risks of software vulnerabilities in critical defense systems, ensuring that security measures are embedded at the code level before deployment. Understanding inherent cybersecurity risks also aligns with PM-9 risk management strategy, which requires organizations to develop a structured approach to assessing, prioritizing, and mitigating cybersecurity risks before implementing security controls. This control ensures that organizations establish a clear methodology for identifying baseline cybersecurity risks, allowing security teams to align mitigation efforts with business priorities and regulatory requirements. A multinational financial institution implementing this control may use structured risk evaluation frameworks to assess inherent cybersecurity risks across its global operations, ensuring that security investments are aligned with high-risk areas such as digital banking fraud and insider threats. These controls can be adapted based on organizational size, industry, and cybersecurity maturity. A small business may implement basic inherent risk assessment measures, ensuring that customer databases, cloud-based assets, and critical operational systems are evaluated for potential cybersecurity threats before security policies are established. A large enterprise may deploy AI-driven risk modeling platforms, predictive security analytics, and automated risk classification tools to ensure that cybersecurity risks are continuously assessed, classified, and prioritized based on evolving threat intelligence. Organizations in highly regulated industries such as finance, energy, and healthcare may require legally mandated inherent risk assessments, third-party cybersecurity audits, and structured risk mitigation planning to ensure compliance with industry-specific regulations. Auditors assess an organization's ability to understand inherent cybersecurity risks by reviewing whether structured, documented, and continuously enforced risk assessment frameworks are in place. They evaluate whether organizations implement structured risk classification models, enforce real-time inherent risk evaluation policies, and integrate predictive cybersecurity risk modeling methodologies into enterprise-wide security governance strategies. If an organization fails to assess inherent cybersecurity risks effectively, auditors may issue findings highlighting gaps in cybersecurity risk awareness, weak alignment between security controls and actual risk exposure, and failure to integrate inherent risk assessments into cybersecurity risk mitigation strategies. To verify compliance, auditors seek specific types of evidence. Baseline risk assessment reports and structured cybersecurity risk evaluation documentation demonstrate that organizations formally define and enforce structured inherent risk assessment governance models. Threat exposure analysis records and real-time risk prioritization audit logs provide insights into whether organizations proactively assess cybersecurity risk factors and adjust security measures accordingly. Incident response evaluations related to unmitigated inherent risks and predictive attack simulation reports show whether organizations effectively track, prioritize, and mitigate cybersecurity risks before they escalate into security incidents. A compliance success scenario could involve a global pharmaceutical company that undergoes an audit and provides evidence that inherent cybersecurity risk assessments are fully integrated into enterprise cybersecurity governance, ensuring that security teams continuously evaluate risk factors, prioritize high-severity threats, and dynamically adjust security controls based on real-time risk intelligence. Auditors confirm that cybersecurity risk assessments are systematically enforced, security protections are dynamically adjusted based on risk exposure, and enterprise-wide security policies align with structured, inherent risk assessment governance requirements. In contrast, an organization that fails to implement structured risk evaluation frameworks, neglects inherent risk classification, or lacks formalized risk mitigation workflows may receive audit findings for poor cybersecurity risk awareness, weak cybersecurity risk prioritization, and failure to align risk assessment strategies with regulatory compliance mandates. Organizations face multiple barriers in ensuring that inherent cybersecurity risk assessments remain continuous and effective. One major challenge is lack of automation in risk evaluation models, where organizations fail to implement real-time risk quantification tools, leading to outdated or incomplete cybersecurity risk assessments. Another challenge is failure to align inherent risk assessments with evolving cybersecurity threats, where organizations do not update risk models based on emerging adversary tactics, increasing exposure to high-severity security risks. A final challenge is over-reliance on static risk assessment methodologies, where organizations apply traditional cybersecurity risk assessment models instead of dynamically adjusting risk prioritization based on real-time security intelligence and evolving attack trends. Organizations can overcome these barriers by developing structured inherent cybersecurity risk assessment frameworks, ensuring that cybersecurity protections remain continuously optimized, and integrating real-time risk modeling into enterprise-wide cybersecurity governance strategies. Investing in automated risk quantification platforms, predictive cybersecurity risk analytics, and AI-driven risk exposure evaluation solutions ensures that organizations dynamically assess, monitor, and refine inherent cybersecurity risk assessment strategies in real time. Standardizing inherent risk assessment governance methodologies across departments, subsidiaries, and external business partners ensures that cybersecurity risk classification policies are consistently applied, reducing exposure to cybersecurity threats and strengthening enterprise-wide risk awareness. By embedding inherent cybersecurity risk assessments into enterprise cybersecurity governance strategies, organizations enhance cybersecurity risk awareness, improve regulatory compliance, and ensure sustainable cybersecurity risk management strategies across evolving cyber risk landscapes. That wraps up today's discussion on framework. Don't stop here. Head over to cyberauthor.me to explore more cybersecurity topics and discover a best-selling book covering NIST and other critical cyber frameworks. Please like, rate, and review this episode on Apple and Spotify. Until next time, remember that knowledge is power.